What's going on, guys? In this video, we're going to apply the principles of the clean architecture by Bob Martin in our Golang API. But first, let's do a quick overview of those principles. So in order to follow a clean architecture approach in our application, the application should be independent of frameworks, so we are not tied to a specific framework. Our application should be able to replace the HTTP framework, for example. Our application should be testable, so we can test the business logic without the database or the UI. We need to be independent of the UI. In our case, we are working on a RESTful API, so we don't care if the client is a web browser or a mobile application or an IoT device. Our application should be also independent of the database, so we should be able to change the persistence layer. We can start using Firestore and then we can replace it by MySQL or MongoDB, for example. And our application should be also independent of any external agency, so our business rules don't know anything about any external factors. Okay, remember to share, like, and subscribe. Let's make Uncle Bob proud, and let's get started. In a previous video, we created a repository to connect our application to the Firestore database. And let's go there. So this is our repository. We created an interface and we created a couple of methods, one to save the posts and another one to get all the existing posts from the Firestore database. So having this interface will allow us to keep independent the concrete implementation from the rest of the application. So the rest of the application, like in this case, this route, is just accessing this interface, this one actually, the post repository interface. And here we can change the concrete implementation. So we're going to make some changes in the structure, but having an interface is a good first step. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to create a new file. And this file is going to be the concrete implementation for the Firestore database. So this is going to be Firestore repo. I'm going to paste this here. And I'm going to remove the interface. And here I'm going to remove everything but the interface. So this is going to be our interface. Now we only have this implementation, that is the Firestore implementation for that interface, but we may also have a MySQL repo, for example. Or we can also have a MongoDB repo implementing that interface. Okay, some other changes that we need to do here. For example, this constructor, this needs to be new Firestore repository, because this is a specific implementation for that database. In the case of MongoDB, we're going to have another constructor, another function that is going to be new Mongo repository, and the same for MySQL, new MySQL repository. So here I'm going to add the package so we don't get any of these errors. And I'm going to add the same here. Now we are independent of the database. So we can use Firestore, Mongo, MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, whatever you want to use. If we go to routes.go, we're going to see that we have mixed up some business logic like this with code that is specific for a controller, like setting the content type of a header or writing the response or encoding a specific object. So we're going to need to split this in a service layer. The service layer is going to be the use case or the business logic. And then the controller is going to be the code that is going to be responsible of interacting with the API layer. So I'm going to create a new folder. That's going to be service, and another one that is going to be controller. And our service is going to be called from the controller, and the service is going to call the repository to add new posts and get existing posts from the database. So I'm going to create a new file here. So this is going to be post service.go. And here, this is going to be post controller.go. Okay, let's create the service first. So the package is going to be service. And this is going to be the interface for the service. Type post service interface. And we're going to have three methods. We're going to have a validate method. That is going to receive a post. Actually, the reference to the post, entity.post. We need to import that package. Import. And this is going to return an error if there are any errors. The other method is going to be the create method. That is going to receive the post. I'm going to copy this. And it's going to return either a post or an error. And the last one is going to be a find all method that is going to return either an array of posts or an error. Like that. Okay. Okay, so in order to implement this interface, we're going to create an struct that's going to be service. And we're going to create a function that is going to be a constructor function. We're going to call it new post service. That is going to return a post service. It's going to return this struct that is going to implement this post service interface. Like this. Okay. And now let's implement these three functions. So we're going to have func, and it's going to be service. This is the way that we have to use to specify that this struct is going to implement that function. The same for the create function and the same for the find all function. Okay. And here what we're going to validate is if we receive an empty post or a nil value as a post. And in that case, we're going to return an error. And we can use this method from the errors package. This should import the errors package, yes, here. And here we can pass the message, the error message, actually. You can say the post is empty. Okay, some other validations that we can do here is the title. If post that title is empty, like this. Here I forgot to return the error. Return error. Okay, and we can do something similar here. We can say that the post title is empty. And if we don't get any errors, we'll return nil. And here what we need to do is we need to grab the logic to create a new post from here. We were using here the rand library to generate a random identifier. So I'm going to copy this from here. Sorry, here. And we need to add the repo so we can access it from here. And I'm going to grab that from the routes file from here. Okay, let's go back to the service. And I'm going to add that here. And I need to import that package. Okay, and here I already have the reference, so I just need to do that. And I need to return this. Okay, that's it for the create method of our service. And now I need to return repo that final. I forgot to add this. Sorry, this. Okay, and that's it for the service. And I don't know why it's throwing an error here. What is the problem? Undefined repository. Yeah, because this is not new post repository. This is new Firestore repository. We changed the name. Yeah. Okay. And now let's move on to the controller. So I'm going to grab, first I'm going to create the package. It's going to be controller. And now I'm going to grab pretty much all the code from here. And here we need to use the service. So I'm going to import the service. And here I'm going to use service that post service. And this is going to be new post service. Like that. Yeah, that's the right path. Okay, and here, instead of using the repo, I'm going to use the service. So I'm going to rename this as service. I'm going to rename this to avoid this issue. It's a naming issue. So I'm going to use post service. And I don't know why it removed service. Okay. And now from the controller, we are using the service here, and I need to add the same here. So I'm going to use post service. I'm going to remove these 2 lines. And I'm going to use create. And I'm going to pass the post as a parameter. I need to also validate that the post contains the information that we need. So I'm going to call the validate method from the post service that validate. And I'm going to pass a reference to the post. And I need to assign the error in case we get any errors. And I'm going to add this code to handle that error. And here I created a class to avoid hardcoding this JSON. And this is errors that service error. And here I need to pass the message. And I need to import that package. Okay, if we go there, it's basically a struct that has a message. That's the only attribute. Okay, let's go back to the controller. And let's do the same for the rest of the errors. First, I need to use this. I need to use the encoder. And I need to encode that error. And yeah, this is wrong. I need to pass this as the message of the struct. Like that. And I'm going to do the same for the rest of the error messages. And the same here. Okay, I'm going to use a different name for this variable. In this case, the message is going to be the message that we are setting here in the validate method. It's going to be or the post is empty or the post title is empty. So let's go back. And the way we have to access that message is by using the error function. Error1.error. And this error function is going to return a string that's going to be the error message. Okay, and here I forgot to handle the error. So I'm going to receive the post and an error. And I need to handle that error again. Let's use result. And here is error2. And here I need to use result. Okay, and here we are going to set a message. Error saving the post. Okay, and that's that for the add post function. So we have our controller ready, and the controller is using the post service, and the post service is using the file store repository. But we can also change this if we create a specific implementation for Mongo. We can create a function that is going to be the constructor to access this Mongo repository, and the same for MySQL or any other database. And here I'm going to remove this file completely. And I need to add an interface for this controller. I forgot to add that. So I'm going to do that right now. type, this is going to be post controller, interface, and it's going to implement these two methods, the get posts method that is going to receive the HTTP response writer and the HTTP request, and the add post method here. I'm going to capitalize the first letter just to keep the convention. Okay, another thing that we need to change in order to be independent of frameworks, here we depend on Max. So all the implementation of our API depends on Max. So we need to create a layer if tomorrow we want to use a specific HTTP server, or if we want to implement our own HTTP framework, we should be able to do it. So we're going to make a few changes here. Our router is implementing this handle func function, and that's pretty much the only thing that it's doing. But we are passing here the get method, the post method. So what we want to do is we're going to create a router interface that is going to implement the get method and the post method. If we add new operations in our API to handle all the HTTP verbs or methods, we're going to need to add the put method, the delete method, the patch method, etc. So let's do that. I'm going to create a new folder that is going to be HTTP. So I'm going to create a new file, and this is going to be the interface. So I'm going to call it router.go, and the package is going to be router. And I'm going to create the router interface, router. And here we are going to create the different methods. Let's go back to the server. We're going to need something that receives the URI or the resource, and a function that has two arguments, these two arguments, the response writer and the request. So I'm going to grab this. Let's start by adding the get method. And it's going to receive a URI that is going to be a string, and a function that is going to receive the response writer and the request. And we also need to implement a post method like that. And I think we should be fine. Yeah, and the last thing here is the initialization of the HTTP service. We're going to need to add another function here that is going to be the serve function that is going to receive the port where this service is going to be listening. Okay, now that we have our router interface, let's create a concrete implementation for the Max framework. So I'm going to create a new file here that's going to be maxrouter.go. The package is going to be router. And in order to implement the router interface, I'm going to need to declare a struct like this, type max router struct. And I also going to need to implement a function to have a constructor in order to be able to access this specific implementation. So new max router, and the return type of this function is going to be the interface router, and this is going to return the struct. Like this. I'm going to grab the signatures from here, and I'm going to start working on the implementation for the Max HTTP framework. Here I need to pass the struct, Max router, the same for the post, and the same for the serve method. Okay, and here I need to access to the Max library, and I'm going to create a variable for that. And I'm going to call it Max Dispatcher. And here I need to use this. Max.new router, like that. And I need to import that library here. I'm going to grab that dependency from here. Okay, that's the package. Like that. Okay, and for the get operation, we need to use the Max library by using this Max Dispatcher. And here we need to call the handle function. And to this function, we need to pass the URI and the function. And we need to assign the get method for this, like this, methods, get. And it's going to be pretty similar for the post method. We only need to change this. And here we are going to use this function. Let's go back. Let's paste it here. And the router is going to be actually the Max Dispatcher. And here I'm going to add a log, fmt.printf, and I'm going to add a message, Max HTTP server running on port, and I'm going to pass the port here. Okay, now we have our first implementation of the router. So we need to replace this. I'm going to create a variable here. And this is going to be HTTP router. And we need to import the package replacing this one. It's going to be HTTP, and here we're going to use router. This is the interface, and this is going to be equals to router.new max router. This is the function that we are using to create a new instance of the Max router. Okay, and I'm going to remove this. we're not going to use it. And here I need to replace this by this new router that implements the interface that we created. So this is going to be HTTP router, this is going to be get. And we're going to pass the URI. And we need to do the same here for this operation. It's going to be HTTP router dot get. And we need to remove this. And same for the post method. It's going to be post. I need to remove this and this. And we need to use the serve method. HTTP router that serve. And we need to pass the port. Like this. Okay, I'm going to comment these two lines. And let's test this. Go run. Okay, and here we have our Max HTTP server running on port 8000. Let's go to Postman and let's try the get operation. Oh yeah, we don't have any handlers for that URL, so I'm going to remove this and I'm going to test just this. Okay, let's try this. Okay, and it's up and running, so we're good. Great. Okay, and now what I need to do is I need to use the controller, this one, from the server. So I need to import the controller package here. Controller. And I need to add the post controller here. It's going to be controller that post controller. This is the interface that we created. And this is going to be controller that new post controller. Okay, I forgot to add a function. And I'm going to copy this from here. And here I need to also add the struct. So this is going to be type controller struct. And this is going to return the post controller interface. And it's going to return this controller. And I need to add the controller here to make it implement each of these methods. And the same for the other function. Okay, now we have our controller implementing the two methods, and we should be able to use it from here. Okay, yes, we don't get any errors here. So here we need to pass the operation, actually the get post operation. And here for the post method, we need to pass the add post operation or the add post function. Okay, let's check. Yes, this is okay, and this is okay. Great. Okay, I'm going to stop the server. I'm going to start it again. And let's go to Firestore. And we don't have any, to refresh this just in case, but we don't have any documents here. So let's create one. Okay, let's check in Firebase if we have this new element. Yes, we have this new document here. And let's run the get operation. It's actually posts. And yes, we get the document that we just created here. Okay, but Max is just one possible implementation of this router interface, and we can also use any other HTTP framework, such as Kai or Chi. I don't know how to pronounce it, but we are going to implement another router using that specific framework. So I'm going to create a new file here. I'm going to call it Chi router or Kai router. And we're going to implement this router interface, but using this specific framework. So the package is going to be router. No, router like that. And we need to create a structure type chai router struct like that. And we're going to create a function, new chi router. And this is going to return the interface that we have for this HTTP layer. And this is going to return a reference to the chai router, like that. This is struct, like that, okay. And now we need to implement all the different functions that we define here as part of this interface. So let's do that. It's going to be func, and here it has a reference to this struct. And the same for the rest of the functions. And here I need to create a variable. I'm going to do it here. And I'm going to close this. And first I need to import that library. So first I need to install this Chi or Kai library. So go get, and the location of the library is github.com/go-chi/chi. Okay, and I'm going to grab this URL and I'm going to import that library here. Okay, and here I'm going to create a variable that's going to be chi dispatcher, and this is going to be equals to chi that new router. This is similar to Max. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that dispatcher, and I'm going to use the get method. That's the way that Chi handles the get HTTP requests. And I'm going to pass the URI and the function here. And something similar is going to be for the post function. Instead of get, this is going to be post. and I need to pass the URI and the function. And here I'm going to grab this from here, and I'm going to adapt it. Sorry, here. I'm going to adapt it for the Qi router. And this is actually Qi router. So I'm going to rename this. And I'm going to change the message here. This is going to be Qi HTTP server running on port and whatever port we are going to pass to this router. Okay, I think we are good. And now let's go back to the server. And instead of using max, let's use Qi. Okay, now I'm going to run this. Now we can see that the Qi HTTP server is running. So let's try it now, just to check that everything is still working as we expect. So if we try to get the posts, okay, yes, we get the post. And let's create a new one, just in case, to check that everything still works as we expect. Okay, I'm able to create the new document, and yeah, and we still can get the response that we expect from this Qi server. So now we are independent of the HTTP framework, so we can either use Qi or we can use Max. So we created this router interface, and we created two implementations, one for Max and another one for Qi or Kai. Great. Okay, and if we go here to the controller, we're going to see that we are creating this service here. So something that will allow us to have a better testability is going to be passing this service. In this case, we are going to use the controller. More efficient way to do this is going to be using some kind of dependency injection framework or mechanism. Now we are going to do this by passing this service in here in this constructor. So it's going to be service, and the service is going to implement this post service interface. I'm going to add this here, and I'm going to assign this variable to that argument. So service, and here I'm going to remove this. Okay, and now what I need to do is, if I go back to the server, I need to import the service package, and I need to pass the service here. So I'm going to create the service, post service, service that post service equals to service that new post service. This is the constructor service, and I'm going to pass this post service here to the controller. So now we assign this service using this function or this constructor function. Okay, let's go back to the server. And the same happens here in the service. If we go here, we're going to see that we are creating the repository here. We're creating a new reference to the Firestore repository, and it's going to be better for a better testability of this service if we pass the repository here in the constructor. So let's do that. It's going to be repo, and this repo is going to implement this interface. And I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to assign the repo to this variable. And now I'm going to import the repository package. repository, and I'm going to create the post repository here. It's going to be repository that, and it's going to be, let me check. I'm going to the repository. It's going to be, post repository. This is the interface, the generic interface. And then we have the concrete implementation, that is repository that new Firestore repository. Okay, and now we need to pass this repository to the service. Great. If we go here, now we receive the repo in this function or this constructor, and we assign that value here. Okay, so now we have the repository. In this case is the Firestore repository, but if you want to integrate our application with MySQL, MongoDB, Postgres, Oracle, SQL Server, or whatever, we can create a new class here. We implement this post repository interface, and we are good to go. And here we have this service, and we are passing that repository. So this service is also independent from the repository. So we have a better separation of concerns on that as well. And also we have the controller, and the controller, we are passing the post service. We can create a different implementation, for example, of this post service. Okay, let's try this. I'm going to close this and I'm going to start the server again. Okay, and let's run this, and yes, and we still get the data. And let's create a new post. Let's say title 3 and text 3. Yeah, we get a successful response. And if we go again and we get all the posts, we get title 2, title 3, and title 1. Great. And if we go to database, yes, we have the title 1, the title 2, and the title 3. Okay, now we have our application that is independent of frameworks, that is independent from databases, that is independent from the UI because it's a RESTful API, so we don't care if we get requests from a mobile application or from a web browser, for example. And we have a testable application because we have different implementations from an interface, so we can mock that interface and we can test using that mock implementation. Or we can also test our repo using an in-memory database. And the same for the controller. And we can mock the service and we can unit test our controller. And the same for the service, right? We can mock the repository and we can unit test our service. We can test our business logic. For example, the service is the place where we have our use case or our business logic. So the idea here is, in order to test this business logic without depending on any external libraries or any external dependencies, we can mock this repository and we can make that mock implement this post repository interface, and we can isolate this service and unit test it. Okay, that's all I have for today. Hopefully Uncle Bob is proud. Thank you for watching. Remember to share, like, and subscribe to the channel. And I see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.